energy and air pollution will be one of the top 5 issues for the general election.
We talk about Putin being in control. He's not really. It's the various factions under him, and it suits them to have him at the front.
If you're trying to save for a house deposit and you'd have to save up some crazy amount of money, how on earth are you going to do that if a pint is £7?
There's certain key things that we want from India, and there's certain key things that they want from us.
Hello, you're listening to Bloomberg UK Politics. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Lizzy Burden.
So the political world, certainly for Westminster, is back from recess and from the couple of weeks of party conferences. But the Israel-Hamas war is escalating. There's been this intense diplomatic effort from the United States, including the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. He is back in Israel today. He's been around 9 different countries in the region. Possibly also we'll see the US President Joe Biden visiting Israel. That seems to be the discussion today. And the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz may head to Israel on Tuesday, according to the German newspaper Bild, after, of course, the EU's Ursula von der Leyen visited. She was then praised for that visit, the support that the EU showed to Israel on that front by the Israeli ambassador to the EU, who was speaking to us this morning.
Controversial at home, though, to be promising that support on behalf of the EU. But here in the UK as well, Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, is going to address the war in Parliament this afternoon. Of course, over the weekend, there were thousands of pro-Palestine demonstrators taking to the streets in central London. More than 1,000 Met police officers deployed for the march. And then this morning, Rishi Sunak also visiting a Jewish community site, reminding us of the repercussions on home soil. I look across the channel to France, home to the biggest Jewish and Muslim communities in Europe, and it's already feeling the strain of war at home, these ancient wounds being reopened.
Yeah, indeed. Well, with the Israeli army poised to stage a large-scale offensive in Gaza, the bombing of the area continues, but Israeli military said that they would refrain from targeting a particular part of North Gaza for 4 hours today to allow civilians safe passage to the south of the territory, which is what they've asked them to do, to leave. Earlier we spoke to Jonathan Conricus, who is the spokesperson for the Israel Defense Forces.
War isn't what we're looking for, but war was forced upon us by a bloodthirsty terrorist organization of subhumans that perpetrated some of the worst atrocities seen in recent times. We're responding to that, and we will rectify the situation and create a better future for ourselves and for our children.
So the determination you can hear there from the IDF. Joining us now is Bloomberg opinion columnist Marc Champion. Marc, thank you for your time. You heard there the Israeli military's description of Hamas as subhuman. How aggressive will the Israeli response be to that Hamas attack?
Well, I think it's clear it will be very overwhelming, I think is the way to describe it. They have amassed an enormous amount of hardware at the border with Gaza. They have mobilized more than 300,000 reservists. This is going to be a large operation, and the Israelis are fully aware that it also won't be easy. Hamas has been preparing for this, digging underground to prepare for it, no doubt preparing booby traps and all the other things that are actually common in urban warfare, which is one of the things that makes it among the most dangerous and difficult forms of warfare. Multiplied when you have a lot of civilians in place, and it's almost impossible to avoid collateral casualties when they are. That's why, if there's any piece of good news at the moment, it is that there have been several 100,000 Gaza civilians who have moved out of the north into safer areas towards the south. Hopefully there will be enough time then to prepare to get humanitarian aid corridors opened from Egypt so that those people can be supplied with the water, food, power, tents, shelter, etc. that they need.
Yeah, the question we can't seem to get answered is how and when they'll get to go back. But Marc, I wonder what the risks now are of a wider conflict and who that might mean.
Well, I mean, the risks are very real, and that clearly is what the U.S. is concerned about. and why Antony Blinken has been very busy in a kind of shuttle diplomacy, visiting the neighboring Arab states, the Gulf states, and is now coming back to Israel. He's been, the US has been, through back channels, reportedly has been sending messages to Iran not to stoke the conflict and widen it. The carrier fleets that the US is putting in place in the Mediterranean are designed to deter Hezbollah from attacking from the north. So this is clearly a very, very real and live concern. And both the US and the UK, James Cleverly, has been sending out similar messages, and no doubt that will be part of the message of Chancellor Olaf Scholz if he comes to Israel also.
Does a visit from President Joe Biden change anything? I'm simply aware that there are such very different views on this from, the two sides. Does actually the visit of Joe Biden, how does that change things? Does it delay anything?
Well, it's a very good question, and one to which I don't know the answer. I suspect that the decision on whether to go on the part of President Biden will be based on how he thinks that the Israelis will react. So if Biden does decide to go, and it becomes clear that that he is not going to be there and wouldn't go, if that meant being present as the Israeli forces go in, then obviously that would create a delay and would create more time for Blinken to, get the corridors open that he's been working on. From the Israeli point of view, obviously desperate to, respond to what was an absolutely heinous attack, and they want to respond quickly. But from their point of view, militarily, there isn't a great deal of disadvantage to waiting. Simply put, Hamas is ready. They've been preparing for years, so a few extra days or even an extra week or two in order to get ready to prepare the ground, get more civilians out of the way. Militarily, it shouldn't make a great deal of difference.
But Marc, when that moment comes, we've spoken to Dr. Ghassan Abu Sitta. He's Médecins Sans Frontières surgeon, one of them working in Gaza, and he says a ground invasion is going to cause a humanitarian disaster. Let me just play you that.
It'll be an absolute catastrophe, carnage. Gaza is so densely populated, 2.25 million people in a very small area of land. This is a turkey shoot. And if you go into Gaza, you go in knowing that you're going to have to commit massacres.
Marc, when Hamas are using hostages as human shields, it seems that no amount of warnings or evacuations can prevent this situation getting bleaker and bloodier.
You're not wrong, and the doctor, when he was speaking, is not wrong. We know what happened. The Israelis went in on the ground in a more limited fashion in 2014. The result was 2,000 casualties. We already have more than 2,000 casualties from the air campaign. So there's no question that there will be a lot of civilian casualties as a result of an Israeli incursion. But there are differences in scale, so that if the Israelis have made it clear that they are going to go into the north, that's Gaza City, and they are trying to get people to move south. So if they do, and they go into the north when there's only 100,000 or so people left of the 1.2 million who were there before, that clearly will have a big impact on how many civilian casualties there are.
Yes.
There will simply be fewer people there. But it will still be awful, and it will still be bloody, and it will still be politically very difficult to manage. This is a crisis with very few good answers, to be honest.
And we still don't understand, and of course, one of the great difficulties of it is actually an exit strategy then for Israel. Even if they can reach their goal of crushing Hamas, what is the exit strategy?
Also a very good question, and also a reason to wait and figure that out before you go in. We know all too well what, a heat of the moment invasion without a proper exit strategy, how that can end up. The US saw it after 9/11 in Afghanistan, in Iraq. So, a little extra time to figure out what you're going to do at the end. Start talking to partners, perhaps the UN about some sort of administration for Gaza afterwards. These things would be smart.
It seems a long way off at this point. Marc Champion, thank you so much for your analysis. That's Bloomberg opinion columnist Marc Champion. Now, this is going to reverberate through into UK politics. As I say, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is going to be speaking in the House of Commons this afternoon to MPs about the government's response. And it's the first time that Parliament will be able to debate the issue since the conflict started. For analysis, we're also joined by Adam Blenford from our UK government team. Adam, both Keir Starmer, the opposition Labour leader, and Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, are speaking for the first time on this afternoon in Parliament. What are they likely to say?
Well, Sunak has already come out with a statement and has obviously been the first response as Prime Minister of the UK in recent days, and he's been steadfastly behind Israel, and he's been, I think, this morning visiting a Jewish community site and offering repeated and fulsome support for Israel's right to defend itself and solidarity with Israel's loss, and very much sitting in that position. Keir Starmer, on the other, and he'll repeat that in Parliament. He will make that case very strongly that the UK is four square behind Israel, which has always been an ally. Keir Starmer's position is perhaps slightly more complicated. The Labour Party has just re-attracted, as it were, brought back many of its Jewish former members who left the party under Jeremy Corbyn's time as leader. They've just held their conference last week where lots of people came back there, Jewish members came back for the first time, and yet under the same Labour banner, they have a lot of members and supporters and voters who are more naturally inclined to support the cause of Palestinian rights. So the Labour Party leader is in a bit more of a tricky political triangulation position, and as perhaps unsavoury as it might look, the Prime Minister is probably going to allow him to squirm a little bit on that.
Yeah, indeed. Well, when it comes to the Labour Party, two councillors have actually quit over Keir Starmer's comments. Will things, though, get harder with a ground offensive? One surely has to think that could be quite inevitable. Will Rishi Sunak continue to echo the US position? Obviously, the UK has, again, a historic significance in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Let's put that, that's perhaps putting it very mildly, but how is the UK going to navigate something that the colonial history of the UK makes very difficult too?
I mean, I think if you heard what Marc just said there, everything will get more acute, everything will get more difficult, the images will become more hard to bear, the stories will become more tragic, and attention obviously is shifting in this country and perhaps around in European countries in the United States from the initial shock and horror of last week's attacks in Israel, which dominated early stages of coverage. Now the pictures we're all seeing are of what's going on in Gaza and what's still to come. That will bear down. If Rishi Sunak is trying to stand united and consistently behind Israel, the images will then pressure him to moderate his position in some way, and Keir Starmer will also be pressured increasingly by people who suggest that a progressive or a Labour leader must not be quite so behind a country engaging in acts of warfare, especially
if they end up being blatantly disproportionate.
Indeed, how it plays. It's going to put a lot of pressure, and it's doing the same thing as I think Marc alluded to in other European countries. Emmanuel Macron in France has the largest Jewish community in Europe, the largest Muslim community in Europe. There's the tension there. So
I was speaking to the CEO of Chatham House, Bronwyn Maddox, at Labour Party conference, in fact, last week, and I asked her if this does escalate into a wider conflict in the Middle East, what would happen in terms of the UK and the US. And she says for the US, it wouldn't even take a heartbeat. In a heartbeat, it would choose Israel over Ukraine. And I wonder what the impact is for UK foreign policy, because we're closer to Ukraine, and economically, strategically, surely Ukraine more important than Israel. So where does this leave our policy on this other war closer to home?
The Ukraine policy is more bedded in. You know, the war has been ongoing now for unfortunately 18 months and more. There are we do have more fiscal constraints, though. I mean, we are getting involved militarily in aid to Ukraine to the tune of many billions of pounds. That those programs are both ongoing, and Rishi Sunak in particular, as a security-minded Conservative Prime Minister, will be minded not to roll back from those. Fiscal constraints will come into bear at some point, but I think Israel receives most of its military aid from the United States, and Joe Biden came out yesterday to say that they have the capacity to deliver both programs at the same time.
So in a way the UK won't have to choose.
The UK probably won't have to choose quite so much, but it's a very good point, and it's one to watch.
Yeah. I suppose the last thought is, does the UK have any diplomatic levers actually to pull here, or is it simply that we are going to be an ally to the United States in this issue?
The UK used to be one of the. It used to bring its influence to bear with the European Union when it was a member of the EU. Used to be part of an ancient gathering called the Quad, which tried to sort of negotiate Middle East settlements. These days, it's more of a lone actor. It's more in line simply with the US position. It's trying to bring a little bit of influence to bear, as you alluded to, Caroline. The historical issues do sometimes rear their head, especially when trying to be even-handed with the Palestinians. So it's kind of a matter of the art of the possible, really, as with all diplomacy now.
All right, Adam Blenford, he is the managing editor of the news desk for EMEA. Thank you so much for being with us.
So the situation in the Middle East understandably overshadowed the Labour Party conference in Liverpool last week, which Lizzy, you and I both attended. It meant that the opposition party, though, in some senses, was spared the sort of pressure and scrutiny of delivering more information on their own domestic policies. And this, as we are potentially 15 months out from the next UK general election. So the specifics are important, and here at Bloomberg, our Europe economist Ana Andrade has been crunching the numbers, looking at Labour's plans on how to borrow, how to invest, how to grow the UK economy. And she joins us now. Anna, really great to have you with us. Now, you have looked at some of these Labour plans, and we don't have that much detail on it, but you do think that the pledge could significantly increase UK GDP. By how much, and how would they do it?
Good morning. So what we did was just a simple exercise where we looked, we don't, as you said, we don't have any plans of how much, how permanent, and in which they're going to spend, and all of these details matter, for the impact on the economy, for the long-term impact on the economy. But what we did was just a simple exercise of looking at what would happen to the economy if Labour decided to close the historic gap between the G7 and the UK on public investment. So that would mean an extra 0.7 percentage points of GDP in public investment in the long term. And what we see is that would lift the level of output by 1.5% in the long run. Now, if Labour wanted to get double the boost to the economy, its efforts would need to be seriously more ambitious, because they would need to lift public investment to 4.5% of GDP from 2.9% where it stands there. And that would leave the UK only at the top of the G7 pack, only really lagging Japan. And that would indeed deliver the 3% boost to the economy.
Just explain the problem that Labour is trying to fix here. I mean, how bad is the UK's investment problem?
So we've known for a while that UK has an investment problem compared to the G7, so to its peers, to the G7 average. And you can see that in the public investment numbers and in the business investment numbers. So there's been an historic gap in the public investment within the UK and its G7 peers that has run around 1 percentage point of GDP. And the good news is that recently, over recent quarters, that gap has narrowed. But the bad news is that when you take on the OBR's plan for public capital spending over, the medium term, that gap is only set to widen further because there's a lot of, fiscal consolidation baked into these plans. So essentially, what we did in this note that we put out was just seeing, what would happen to the economy if Starmer really tries to close this, historic gap between the UK and G7.
And sorry, just to go into the basics of it, what are you talking about when you say investment, public investment and private? What is that?
Well, public investment is everything that, the state invests in schools, in infrastructure, and business investment. When I mean private, I mean business investment is more, what's done by the businesses in the UK. That excludes residential, but in both those areas, there's been an historic lag in the UK when you look at it and compare it with the G7.
So before we get into how much this could actually boost the economy, let's just unpack a bit about the promises here. So Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, says that each £1 of public investment is going to unlock £3 of private investment. Is that actually achievable?
Well, to us, that sounds a bit optimistic. And we kind of referenced it in the note. So if you do look at existing literature, there are several ways you can go about modelling public investment. But what Rachel Reeves was talking about specifically was about a channel known as crowding in. The kind of the channel, the mechanism where each additional money in private investment kind of brings in private into investing more. And what the literature actually says is that, and this is from the IMF, not till this year actually, kind of says that every one additional pound in public investment leads to 50 pence.
50p?
Yes.
Okay.
So that's kind of, that it does seem too optimistic, but we also need to consider that there's other effects from public investment that can, be accounted for. So productivity, for instance, so beyond crowding in, it could be that if a state decides to, construct a school or invest in R&D, then that brings significant additional productivity gains, and that could, boost the impact from public investment.
Yeah, when we were at Labour Party conference, I asked the Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves how she could know that she wouldn't provoke an unwelcome market reaction. You've got yields high, debt already 99% of GDP, and we saw how the markets punished Liz Truss last year, but all she could tell me was that she's going to be cautious, that she would have ironclad fiscal rules. Do you really think that that's going to wash with investors?
Well, I think what we saw last year was also essentially a reaction to unfunded spending cuts. And I think it was also a reaction to a dismissal of the whole institutional processes that, ensure fiscal sustainability in the UK. I think maybe if Labour does want to follow this strategy where it wants to increase borrowing to invest, it does need to play, by the OBR rules and by the institutional rules. That reduces the risk a bit. Then probably the most ugly part is that, any increase in public investment, it depends on how much it brings to the economy. But I think part of it will need to be funded, and that's likely to mean higher taxes, and that's probably the bit that Reeves doesn't want to get into.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But look, the other factor, though, is what is the alternative? The productivity issue for Britain is 20, if not 30 years old. The UK needs to raise living standards. It can only do that by growing the economy. What choice does the next government, frankly, whoever they are, have? They've got to try to deliver on growth, and that means investing, doesn't it?
Yes. So I think the problem, if you look at, and Bailey actually mentioned this, that the UK,
the Bank of England,
that the UK government kind of needed to tackle two of the problems facing the UK economy, which was limited labour supply and investment. And when you think about GDP in the long run, it's really those two resources and those two inputs that matter. So investment is a crucial part of it, and that's kind of why we say regardless of the benefits the size of the benefit that it brings. We think that closing the gap would lead to a boost to GDP of 1.5%, and that's significant. So it's something that it's worth doing, and that you cannot delay for that longer.
Okay, Ana Andrade crunching the numbers for us on Labour's economic plans. Really great to have you with us. That's our Europe economist, Ana Andrade.
Okay, that's it from us for today. Of course, we'll be back with much more tomorrow. We'll continue to follow the Israel-Hamas war, the implications for the UK, for Europe and for politics here, as of course we're back from recess and Parliament is in session.
And the economic story continues as well, of course. We've got inflation data coming tomorrow at 7 a.m. from the Office for National Statistics. Year on year, economists surveyed by Bloomberg reckon that it's actually going to drop from 6.7% in August to 6.6% in September. And then later in the week, we also get the latest jobs data. Are we still going to see this tightness in the labour market, or will we get some easing there? Something that the government, of course, has been trying to work on as well.
Well, if you like the programme, don't forget to subscribe. Give it 5 stars so that other people can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or wherever you listen.
This episode was produced by James Woolcock and our audio engineer was Maruful Hussain. I'm Lizzy Burden.
And I'm Caroline Hepker. We'll be back with more tomorrow. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg UK Politics. Listen weekdays at noon on DAB Digital Radio in London.